Uh, Thank you very much, everybody, for joining this webinar, the first one. It's still a bit of a trial, clearly, where we just need to get used to the new technology here, which runs via LinkedIn. My name is Jelle de Jong, and over the next half hour, I'll just be presenting to you about discrete choice modeling. I want to make sure that this is a practically commercially grounded session, so it's not going to be a statistics lecture. Many of you will know discrete choice modeling as conjoint analysis or choice-based conjoint. It's sort of a bit of a marketing steal that was in history. I'll go over that. I guess the balance I'm trying to find today is to show a number of elements where discrete choice modeling is truly powerful, and also are the main watch outs when you do this, because it can be treated often too much as a black box, and then it becomes a risk in itself on how you use that data. Just very briefly about myself. I'm Dutch. I'm a mechanical engineer by background, spent some time working for McKinsey and for a company called Partners in Performance. And then I spent 8 years with Diageo, and that's sort of where my journey with pricing and consumer goods started. I first spent some time in London in the group strategy function, but then I actually I headed up a finance department in Australia for Diageo, and that was my landing in the real world. The one thing I found in that, what surprised me most about working in this consumer goods environment, was how an enormous amount of analysis we did on pretty much everything except on pricing. Actually, pricing used to be a little bit of a shit fight, if I'm honest. It used to be, if I had a very strong marketing department and a less strong sales director, then prices had to go up because our brand was so good. And if I had a stronger sales director and a less strong marketing director, then price would go down because we wanted to sell some volume. And very often this was more of a battle of wills than that there was really any hardcore analysis behind that. And funnily enough, as I've then gone on in life, set up Lexia Analytics together with my business partner Wouter Verrij, this has not changed that much, I very often find. Since a few years, we do a lot of work with discrete choice modeling, and that I finally found the key to actually get a fact-based conversation around pricing, a clear way to actually determine, okay, what is the right price here? What's the optimal price point based on a fact base rather than on opinions? And so the starting position here is that I'm very enthusiastic about discrete choice modeling. Of course, I just have some caveats around where you need to be careful with it. Just what I'll do is in this presentation is I'll quickly run you through what discrete choice modeling is, choice-based conjoint analysis. Then I'll talk you through some of the pitfalls as I see them, and some of the assumptions people sometimes make that sometimes are still surprising. And then I'll take you through some of the places where this actually really has a real point of differentiation versus other methods, and where you should definitely consider it. I think it's always nice to tell the start of discrete choice modeling, because at the start of discrete choice modeling, you have to go back to the early 70s to San Francisco when they were building the BART system. And the BART system is basically the metro in San Francisco. And there was traditionally, if you built one of those big infrastructure projects, you did some modeling around to figure out how many passengers will we have. And then based on those passenger numbers, you could build the business case. This is also done at the BART system. I won't bore you with the specifics, but what they used in those days were what they call aggregate models or gravity modeling, which are very broad stroke models to say, okay, this is how many commuters will come across. And these gravity models at the time basically suggested that there was going to be about 14 to 60% of commuters would move across from their normal mode of transport to the BART. There was a young professor in those days. His name was Daniel McFadden, and Daniel McFadden was trialing a new method, which is basically a choice-based method. So rather than saying, okay, we've got this many people working here and I need to move to there, and we think that this many people as a result will change their mode of transport, he actually started doing surveys with them, and he did about 600 surveys. And what he basically would choose to ask people is, what would you choose between these two things? And they found out before that, in a lot of models, if you do a 10-minute walk and a 20-minute train journey, that's the same as a 30-minute car journey. They're both 30 minutes. But actually, they found out that actually give these people as a choice, people will very quickly choose one over the other. Anyhow, in the end, he came out with a estimate that about 6.3% of people move across, which was very different, of course, from the 14 to 15% that the other models had come up with. And at the time, people didn't think too much about it. Then, when the BART actually went live 2 years after, it was basically they did an audit and they found out that 6.5% of people had moved across. So suddenly the world was on fire, because where they had been working with 14 to 15%, realizing there was a big fault, there were a big confidence interval in those models. They had this young professor who suddenly actually was able to predict it in much more accuracy, and that's how discrete choice modeling was born. Really, it was born on work previously to that as well, of course. And Daniel McFadden won the Nobel Prize with this in 2000 in economics. And in his Nobel Prize speech, you can still find it online, he talks at length about the BART system and how forcing people to make choices actually helped him get a better estimate. And by the way, just a small sales point here is this: as Lexia Analytics, we one of our the key person that's in charge of all our survey design and analytics research got his PhD under Daniel McFadden in Berkeley, so we're very well positioned for this type of work. So that's where discrete choice modeling came from, and ultimately what discrete choice modeling is based on, choice modeling is based on, is that if you ask people why they do certain things, or whether they would do certain things, or whether they would buy something, consumers and also business to business buyers historically are terrible in explaining their behavior. If I ask people before they go to a supermarket, what are you going to buy? There's less chocolate in there and there's more salad in there than that store actually can stock. And then when they come out, there's actually usually more chocolate and less salad than they initially said. The same thing, we all know that people at the beginning of Jan all say they're going to go to the gym for the rest of the year, and that these gyms, these fitness establishments have a really good business out of that. And it's even the case, we even do this in B2B work, where basically we talk to company buyers and we ask them to choose between different things. And what they say and what they then choose can be very different things. Again, there you can find the willingness to pay. So that's sort of the background. Ultimately, let's not make it harder than it is either. When you do choice modeling, this is what the customer normally will see. They will see 3, 4, 5 SKUs. They will see a price, they will see usually a description, and then they're usually asked which product do they like most, which other product do they like least, and which product, and would they buy any of this? This is usually a third choice you put in there. So this is, you're not, and by giving people, to give you an idea, normally if you have the same demographics, if you have 100 people and you give them all 18 choices, you basically have 1,800 surveys on different prices, different products, and you get a lot of data in terms of figuring out what is effectively the trade-offs for people. To what extent it's about the size of the bottle, to what extent it's about the image of the bottle, to what extent it's about the message that you send with the bottle, basically. So this is key here, because you're actually you're not asking them to explain anything. You just ask them to choose. That's all you're trying to do. Ultimately, how does it then work? Is the first thing you do in any design is and now I'm actually worried I've got the wrong presentation here, because I had a slightly different slide previously, but we'll figure it out as we get there. Basically, what you're trying to do here is you design the survey. Actually, most importantly, you determine what's the question I'm trying to answer. Then you circulate this to a panel. This is very often something that we treat a little bit as a black box, and you definitely should not. You should be very clear with the company doing this for you, who sits on that panel, how have they been selected, and also how do you actually interact with that panel. More on that later. And then basically what you do is you analyze the responses from those panels, and you calibrate that with existing data. So you basically take your existing consumer takeoff, usually from Nielsen, and you say, okay, well, I know at current prices, I know what percentage of my consumers choose for which brands effectively. And then I also can see that if I take these prices and I change them, then I can make an estimate of how many of these consumers would move and would change. It's also very important, by the way, that with these panels, you make sure that these panels, of course, are in a position to buy. So what you're trying to do is, let's say you were to do this with carbonated soft drinks in 7-Eleven in Hong Kong. This is a random example. Then what you would do is you would screen your channel, your panel for people that actually go to 7-Eleven in Hong Kong and actually buy carbonated soft drinks there. So I know that the people that I give these choices to are actually in a position to make these choices in real life as well. Ultimately, why is discrete choice modeling, or what we also can call a choice-based conjoint, such a great tool? It really is a very efficient way to get a fact base. So the first thing is it can be done relatively fast. It can be done in as little as 4 weeks, sometimes even as little as 2 weeks if it's a follow-up study. Um, maximum that we've ever done that it's ever taken is probably 6 weeks, but generally in 4 weeks everything is from beginning to end is done. It's relatively cheap compared to the stakes that you normally would charge that you're talking about. So if you talk about whether something should go up by $1 or $2 or €1 or €2, you very often talk about hundreds of thousands, but you're more likely even millions of euros in terms of impact. Most of our studies land between 25 and 30,000 euros, and then you've got basically a very strong fact-based, statistically relevant. What it does as well is it gets away from that, what I was calling quote unquote shit fight that I was having regarding what's the right price. We need to move to the next price point, particularly very relevant these days. A lot of brands are continuously thinking about how to take price in the inflationary environment we live in, and this gives you a fact base. This gives you not all sorts of opinions about how strong the brand is and that we shouldn't be discounting or we should be discounting. And it actually gives you, at this price, you would probably sell this type of level of volume. And if you use this type of promotional mechanic versus this one, that's the difference it will make in our consumer base. And the final thing is it gives you a reality check on the brand. To be fair, this is probably the one element where sometimes marketing directors get hurt a little bit because they'd love to believe that their brand is special and different from all others. Unfortunately, most discrete choice modeling work that we do, we always find out that if you're at roughly the same price, so you've got a similar market share, let's say one has got 20% and the other one has got 35%. Actually, the difference in brand is remarkably small, which can be a little bit of a disappointment, but at least this is then stacked up by data rather than a hope and willingness. Okay, so discrete choice modeling is a fantastic tool. It can be done relatively fast. It is relatively cheap, and it gets you away from lots of emotional conversations internally. However, there are a few things to watch out, and I think now, sorry, I've just clearly got the wrong presentation here. I'm terribly sorry. I don't know what I've done. Oh yeah, here it is. That's it. Okay, sorry. I do have the right presentation here. It's an old slide, but there's a few things around. Can everybody see? Can you? Yes, you can see it. There's a few things to. The first thing is just to ground this into reality. I am still surprised that we can have clients which say, actually, I took price went up and the volume went down. There is very few situations, but maybe at the ultra luxury ends, but in most situations, when prices go up, volume will go down. And unfortunately, for 75 to 80, maybe even 85% of all cases, we would see a elasticity of lower than -1, the smaller than -1, so -1.5, -1.2, which effectively means that a 1% price increase leads to more than a 1% volume decrease. In general, products at higher prices have a lower elasticity. So you very often see is that if you have the premium whiskey segment and you go, say, from 40 to 60, that at the €60 end, the price elasticity is lower than at the €40 end. Only really true luxury escapes this. And what we also see very often is that similar products have similar elasticity. So if you're roughly at the same price point, roughly you've got the same market share. In general, what you tend to see there is that you have a similar elasticity. Thresholds, we'll talk a bit about that afterwards. Usually the skew beats the category, but you have in the sense that it's worse than the category. So usually a category as well, if the whole category price goes up, the volume of the category goes down, but actually the elasticity of the category will usually be closer to -1 than the elasticity of individual SKUs. When people switch, they stay close at home. They stay very close to the brand that they've just left, usually in terms of price. And we need to be very careful, and I'll talk about that in the next slide as well, as around sometimes we can get hung up in our modeling about small gaps, and small gaps more often than not, are due to noise rather than actually sincere differences. So this is the single biggest watch out, I think, with the discrete choice modeling, and when you basically get the results. I could do a discrete choice modeling exercise with 3 people, give them all 3 choices, and I will be able to give you a number, elasticity, and all. And if you want, I can give you the elasticity to 3 decimal points behind to 3 decimal points exactness. The only problem is it will mean very little. And I'm still surprised that very rarely do people actually ask for what's the confidence interval of this. So this is a bit extreme here. It says -1.1 to 2.4, but a very normal confidence interval for this would be -1.5 to -1.9, which means that effectively, you've got an 0.4 confidence interval, 95% confidence interval around elasticity. And that doesn't sound like that much, but actually, if you then take that and you take all the other SKUs, like you would, for example, have here on the right-hand side, if you take all these confidence intervals and they all overlap, statistically, this basically means we can't say anything differentiating about them. The one that showed -1.63 and the one that shows -1.42, they might as well swap around because their confidence intervals are for a large part overlapping. And I think it's important to realize that, yes, you can get really good data, you can get a good indication, but you also need to be clear that when you then finally have that model and you start playing around with it, you just need to keep in mind that actually there is a confidence interval in there that actually will very often, small nitty-gritty differences are going to be within the confidence interval rather than outside of the confidence interval. And as long as it falls within the confidence interval, it's not really a statistically relevant signal. So that's when we normally always present our elasticities with a price with a confidence interval, 95%. But that also makes it just a tiny bit less exciting because it's a tiny bit less precise than what people would like it to be. Anybody that ever sees an elasticity of -1.42 should really raise their eyebrows, realizing full well that the confidence interval is never going to be much more different than between 1.2, for example, and 1.6. They're simply those situations are, if anything, very, very rare. So it's important to realize that, yes, you will get a number, but actually that number has a limitation to how accurate that can be. The second one, which is the second most important thing around discrete choice modeling, is people love using an agency for discrete choice modeling, and they will, because it's a skill that's not easily built internally. So they will need to use an agency, and this agency will be very keen to do this work for you because clearly this is their bread and butter. The one thing that agency will struggle with a little bit always is getting the right panel. Because very often, sometimes they actually include the price of the survey in the cost of doing the discrete choice modeling, and then it makes sense to try to get a panel where you get not as many people as possible for as cheap a price as possible. We always charge the survey cost separately because I never want to be seen to be trying to keep that low. What we tend to see is that very often with discrete choice modeling, people use mobile users. Users allow for people to address the survey on their mobile phone. And you have to think about that a little bit. What does that really mean? That means that somebody can sit in a busy bus in the middle of Mumbai on his mobile phone, doing this is if you were doing it for the Indian market, on their mobile phone doing a survey. Now, how relevant is that, and how representative is that from the retail environment that person might find themselves that we're trying to replicate with them? So, and on top of that, the real estate that you then have, the little screen to actually be showing different SKUs is quite quite small, of course. So ultimately, what we're trying to do here generally is we normally would always suggest you only should do it on this desktop and tablet. It's got two benefits. You've got more real estate to play with, And the second benefit, if I'm honest, is and people tend to be stationary. They tend to be looking at a screen. That doesn't mean that everybody will be, giving this their 100% of their attention, but it will still be, on average, we find that there's a lot less speeders, and that the statistical quality of the survey is much higher. Now, the problem is that the panel companies you work with, at the moment you say you only want desktop and want the desktop environment, they will actually charge you more money for it. So it will usually cost a few euros more per survey, but it's well worth the cost, we would suggest. Then the last thing is almost more of an overarching one, which is too often people let these type of exercises, and this goes, by the way, for more than just discrete choice modeling, but survey work in general, become a bit of a black box. The you know if you're going to pay money for this, you should do that survey yourself as well, and run it a few times, and get some colleagues to take it, and ask yourself, does this feel like a real choice? Am I presenting it in the way that I wanted to present it? And very often we see that on this that before we do the field work, this is where multiple iterations happen. So people actually, you say, well, actually, I don't like the quality of the bottle. I think we should try something else. We should add an extra message in there. And then after the field work, you need to be very clear. How were speeders defined? Because as an agency, you very often have a benefit to say actually speeders are anybody that answered it within 3 seconds. But actually, if you look at a desktop, you would very often say actually, if you can do it in less than 5, that's probably already a speeder. But that you very often start to have to lose surveys as a result, which is what you trying to stay away from, given that they cost money. What low quality data was removed, how many people were excluded and why, and were there any straight liners and all that we've taken out. So it's very important that you don't outsource the judgment and the applicability of it all to sort of okay, the AG told us this is, the AG will have an opinion on this, but you should be part of that conversation, so you feel very comfortable with what it is, and you also understand the limitations of it. All right. So those are the things you want to be really careful of when you do these type of things. But where does it really earn its keep? I've got it says here 5 decisions. Now, to be very clear, I've pulled it down to 4. The 5th one is price pack architecture. I think this is completely obvious. Most people use it for this. If they don't, they should. Price pack architecture is where you use discrete choice modeling to figure out what's the best different what different SKUs should I have at what price point, and how does that compare to the competition? And with shrinkflation and all these things happening right now, a very, very relevant thing to do. I think one of the things where discrete choice modeling works very well and where it's very relevant is with psychological price points. So, I remember very good from my days that we would have in Australia, we would have 2 bottles of spirits for $50, and then the alcohol duties excise duties kept going up, and at some stage, $2 bottles for 50 was simply not sustainable anymore from a profitability perspective. But we've done that for the last 7-8 years. And where do you go once you can't do 2 for 50? Do you go for 2 for 52? Do you go for 2 for 55? I can honestly say this was just a massive debate in our business without anybody ever having a fact-based answer to it. This is an example of apparel. This is an apparel brand. They basically sold shorts for $99. Have been doing it for more than 10 years, and suddenly they need to go beyond this 99. And it was very clear that if you go beyond 99, you go into 3 figures. That's a big change. And actually, what was also interesting about this is that actually the change from 99 to 100 or 105, that's where the big gap fell. Once you were past that first threshold, then actually the rest were smaller losses. So just as a case here, where this brand ended up going is to $120, because they knew they were going to get the hit anyway, and getting the hit a little bit worse by going to 120 was much more preferable from a profitability perspective than going to 105. So this is where I think discrete choice modeling can really help you figure out, okay, what are my psychological thresholds, and how do I best go about them? Where do I go afterwards? This is another one which is really good. We spend an enormous amount of money on different promotions. actually figuring out which promotions work best with our consumers, and which promotions work best in actually getting consumers away from their existing brand to a new brand. So, a 10% off is very often, in our experience, something where you just subsidize buyers who buy it anyway. If I've got a deodorant and I give it 10% off, or I've got a bottle of wine, I give it 10%. People that were originally buying this think, oh, this is a great deal. But it very often isn't enough for somebody that wasn't normally buying it to come across. And ultimately, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get trial in there. So what you can do here is you can do a discrete choice modeling exercise where you show different promotions, and you can screen your panel up front about what brand do they normally buy, what not brand of deodorant, what brand of soap, what brand of chocolate do they normally buy, is their preferred brand, and how many of those people would actually consider trying this other thing. And you can also see which customers actually, yes, this was their preferred brand, and if you give it a 10% discount, they'll still buy it because it's their preferred brand. But those are exactly the type of mechanics you're trying to avoid. Um, where discrete choice modeling is also very powerful is in the conversation with the retailers. Um, So one of the things is what's happening a lot in this world at the moment is that suppliers need to talk to a retailer because they want to take price, and actually that retailer sees you coming a mile off and is actually not that interested in taking price. So it becomes a bit of a argument between the retailer and the supplier. The problem there is very often that we've got two different agendas. We've got the supplier trying to say, actually, well, I need to increase my net sales value and I need to increase my profitability, particularly because my costs are going up. But the buyer worries about the other things, worries about the volume, the category margin, the rate of sale, and is thinking much more at the category level. What you can do with the discrete choice modeling exercise is take a category approach. You can take your brand, all of your competitor brands, and say, okay, well, you know what? I've now done this, and then you can basically take that to the conversation with your buyer and show, actually, this is a scenario where we take price, we change these type of promotions from X to Y, and as a whole, the category will effectively also go up. And clearly, because you take the lead here, you can then effectively take a lead also in terms of which brand goes first in taking price versus the competition. And what's powerful about this, you bring your own data to this conversation. Our experience is that buyers as retailers tend to be very appreciative of this because they're struggling with the same thing. They're just coming at it from a different angle. And if you can show that you actually are addressing their issues as well as your own, that together with something that is quite robust in terms of data, that is very much appreciated and makes that conversation a more cooperative conversation. Another one is in innovation. So if we're really honest, and I'm probably going to hurt a few people's feelings here, but if we're really honest, in innovation, very often, most of our innovations aren't true innovations. They're not a completely new to world drink. They're not a completely new to world product. They are changes in existing products, and they will still have a new flavor, and they will have a new fragrance. They'll have a new application or something. But it's something that the consumer sort of understands. So, hey, so you can talk about the concept. This is then, of course, as an example for deodorant. Is it everyday freshness, clinical protection, natural care? Is it 48 hours protection, no white marks, all these type of things? And you can effectively mock all these things up, and you can really try. You can show them next to existing products and see how many of these customers that currently use an existing product would be willing to come across for this, would at least be willing to try it. And as long as your product doesn't then burn their armpits and or bleaches their the hair in their armpits, you're probably onto something there. So this is where, and again, if you think about how much money is involved in actually launching a good innovation, even again, if you were able to do this, if you're able then to share this data with the customer that you're trying to convince to take this innovation on as well. Yeah, I mean, for 30,000 euros, you can have a really good assessment of what the opportunity size would be and what the claims are and the concepts are that work best in the format for you to actually achieve that. So this is where, again, in 4 weeks' time, 6 weeks' time, you could actually get a lot of decent data and insight to help you as a business. So the last thing here, this is almost more of an overarching thing here, as we're getting to the end now, is the best studies, you need to start with a decision. Don't start with a model. Don't start with, and sometimes you can lose track of that. You say, okay, we've got a few decisions to make. Let's do a big modeling exercise. The worst thing that can ever happen is that you get to the end of this whole exercise. You've done the design, then you've done the field work, you've done the calibration, and then you get to the end of that. You think, oh, we should have really asked X or Y. So the very most important thing is you start with, what am I trying to decide? What are really the choices I'm trying to make as a business, and how will that impact me? That means then what scenarios matter, what segments matter, what precision do I need, and what data will validate this. It might actually be that if your precision is so high that up front already is clear that this is not going to be achievable. So this is sort of the things to think about. But the most important thing is, and it's funny, we can sometimes spend a lot of time on this, is what's actually the exact decision we're trying to look at. And very often the first answer might be slightly vague, and actually it then takes some time to work through, okay, no, what's the exact decision? Are we really considering taking the price to X, or is it actually really only Y? And if it's Y, is it this exact price point, or would you like to know what the emotional thresholds are around that? So I think I've just about spoken fast enough to get this done in the half hour that stood for this. So discrete choice modeling is incredibly powerful. It's very practical. It's clearly not magic. You can, anybody can build a beautiful model based on some survey data and give you the feeling that you know exactly what your destiny will be if you do these price increases. You should be careful with it. But actually, as long as you're talking about very specific, if you're clear on your questions around price thresholds, pack architecture, customer negotiation, all these type of things, then it is a really powerful tool that really, if we're honest, can be done quickly, relatively cheaply, and give you then a fact-based rather than opinions. And sometimes that might hurt a few people's feelings who feel very passionate about the brand. I think that was it. Yes.
So we have some questions. So folks who have joined, sadly I can't view the LinkedIn as I'm streaming here or using a third party website, but nevertheless I'm sure you guys can hear me and see me. So please push your comments or questions over here. In the meantime, we have one question from Saurabh Deshpande, and he's
Yes,
saying,
I see yes.
yeah.
So I can go through them if you want. So do you add none of these as one of the options? Yes, I should have mentioned it. I think I mentioned it, but I realized when I saw the choice card we didn't put it on there. You will definitely always put none of these. I mean, this is also quite maybe just to understand the fundamentals of discrete choice modeling. Ultimately, what you're trying to do with choices is you're trying to get a ranking. So you're trying to get a ranking, and by asking as many questions as possible as you can get away with, really, in one of those surveys, you find the ranking. So by asking none of these, which is the one you like most and which is the one you like least, you get basically 3 data points from every survey. So the answer is yes. The implication of including it is that you basically get more data out of your survey. If it was up to Tiago, the person that I mentioned that got his PhD under Daniel McFadden, he would ask 5 other questions as well. But the problem is then we know that it's too much of a load. Ayon Bhattacharya, what would you recommend as the minimum number of respondents for statistical significance? How about nuances when applying conjoint to B2B products? So very good. There's basically a rule of thumb, I would say, that if you were to look at just one demographic, so let's say that you just were to look at men between the age of 20 and 50 drinking carbonated soft drinks in 7-Eleven or buying carbonated soft drinks, you could get away with 50 people. So generally, if you talk about one homogeneous group of people, 50 of those, giving them 12 to 18 surveys with 3 questions, you actually have a lot of data to work with, and that would be, you would definitely get statistical significance out of that. It probably can be done with less, but it gets a bit harder. What we tend to see is, because usually don't just want to know one homogeneous segment, but more usually you want to know women, men, you want to use different age profiles and all that, or different segments of those customers based on other metrics like housewife versus professional, that type of stuff. You would usually get up, do that times 50. Just as a general rule of thumb, we would generally be between 500 and 1,000 people that we would do the survey with. That's what it tends to come out at, and usually that would be, then to give you an idea, between 3 and 6, €7 a survey. So it's never the thing that makes it ridiculously expensive. When you apply Conjoint to B2B products is a very good question. Very often when you do B2B products, you actually do it in person. So doing the surveys is a bit more work, and it's more expensive as a result of that, because you go there face to face. Very often you then give them on an iPad, show them the options. You can usually show them less options, but you can actually explain those options a bit better. So I would say that, if we can get to 25 to 30 people and give them 12 choices in an interview, we would be quite happy. And actually, I think B2B is where we find that you've got the most value out of these type of exercises, because with consumers you can only ask one price, and usually the other levers in there are still limited. With B2B offerings, you can very often with B2B, you can very often have many more levers, payment terms, supply guarantee, name it, and then you can, you've got more attributes to play with, which is very powerful. Can this be used on historical purchase data in consumer goods sector to predict future outcomes of similar promotion, or if the promotion and features should be altered in the future? So the short answer is yes, and the longer answer is probably no. So the short answer, I mean, yes, is actually very often we use, and actually I think I can stop sharing this now, because that makes me. Very often we use discrete choice modeling when one company wants to take over another company, and then they do exactly that. They basically take historical purchase data, historical scan data very often, and this historical scan data is then used to see, okay, what does the market power become of this company if they don't own one of the brands but both the brand, or both two of those brands. So that's how you use it. The problem you have is if you look at the future, where discrete choice modeling is very powerful, is in situations where the price point and the mechanics you're looking at haven't been done before. So if I've done this promotion 15 different times already, and I'm keeping to the same price points, there's not much value in discrete choice modeling trying to go even further. But if you say, okay, I now know that I need to go to a new price point, or I've got 15 different ideas for promotions, and I can only roll out one nationally, which one am I going to do? And I need to make that decision relatively quickly, rather than doing small trials everywhere. That's where discrete choice modeling comes into its own. How can Conjoint help decide the optimal price, which is industrial commodity product? I mean, we need to be clear on what we call an industrial commodity product. I mean, if it's the price of a barrel of oil, then clearly this is not of any relevance. But for example, we've used discrete choice modeling for biofuels, and very often you see it's not so much the exact product, the core price of the product, because that very often is then indexed in one way or the other, and can very easily be compared. But it's all the other elements that come with it. So it's basically, like I said, supply guarantees, payment terms, certifications for some products. Those things is where it can then help to value those, the willingness to pay. So, for example, this is supply, in biofuels. There are some customers that you want to use biofuels for their generators for if the electricity goes out, for example. This was relevant in Spain a while ago. So they are willing to pay a lot for the supply guarantee. So much so that actually they're happy for you to put up a tank on their premises. These are the Amazon server farms and all that type of stuff. They're happy to put up a tank on your premises that you then maintain for them. They hardly will ever use it. So funnily enough, the amount of biofuel sold to them is tiny, but all the other elements to it make it to still an interesting proposition. What quality should we equip as a pricing professional that AI will not replace analysis decision making, etc.? I don't really know the answer to that. To be honest, it's quite a broad question. I think, if I'm really honest, I think AI can help you with all AI can help us with a lot of the shitty little tasks that really are the ones that really are the ones that actually we're quite happy. It can help with data cleansing. It can help with setting up spreadsheets. But ultimately, they can't do discrete choice modeling surveys for you. They can't help you completely design everything either. So I think as long as you don't try to hide behind analysis, which everybody else can do, but actually are connected to the sales force and the people actually needing to make the sale, that's where I think you can remain relevant. This is a very good question. So much more reliable than you'd very often think. I mean, I'm thinking about a client of ours that in a market that I won't mention specifically, but was thinking about launching a new whiskey. And they were actually saying, you know what? Don't worry about the liquid. We'll get the liquid that it's good enough. That people will be happy to drink it because they're mixing it anyway, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But we've got about 12 different bottle designs. We've got about 5 different claims, and a few age related things in there as well. Now, it's quite interesting. You can then basically do discrete choice modeling, which you then very often exercise. We often divide up in two. The first part is you actually just put the bottle on the shelf next to other products that already exist in that market at different price points and with different claims, etc. And the second one is then you introduce this bottle and say, actually, this is a new whiskey to market. That's why this is this claim to fame. How likely are you? And then you basically go through a next set of choices. From that you can come a long way in figuring out how much market share, if given the right space in store, this bottle will take from other whiskeys, and that would be the same with deodorant and all that. You're talking here particularly about products that, if we're honest, we talk a lot about, but actually we don't make, as a consumer, very often we don't make much of a distinction between. I'm thinking about detergent, dishwashing liquid, deodorant, all those type of things, where yes, we now have something that's got titanium in it, and it's a roll-on, and it's a made of natural products. The consumer buys it, but doesn't really, it's not standing there in the morning thinking, oh, this is really a very different feeling. The same thing with detergent and lots of other products like that. Any other questions?
Not that's coming in.
We do have another 13 minutes on hand. So, folks, if you have questions or you're still thinking, we can give you some time.
Let me ask you a question, Jelle, if you can hear me. The question from Yohung about AI and replacing. Do you think AI will be so smart at one point that it can replace the feedback on analysis like this? That you can simply go to ChatGPT and say, I have these and these options. What will you think as a 600 people population?
Yeah, this is. I mean, to be honest, I'm not lying awake about that at night at the moment by any stretch of imagination, because the whole issue at hand here is that actually we are terrible at defining our choices and explaining our choices. We all drink more than we probably should be drinking. We all eat more fat than we should be eating. And every time that we talk about what we're going to change, we suggest that we're going to be, we all have read a few self-help books and thought now it's all going to get very different. What you tend to see is to quantify those choices without, and that's the beautiful thing about discrete choice modeling, is basically an econometric approach where you say, I don't really care what the reason is. I just want to know what the number is, basically. I just want to be able to predict demand, and I don't think you can do that without the survey. Would it be possible to set up an agent in the future that basically does all this outside of an agency and actually, does? I'm not saying no to that. I mean, that's not, there's a lot of repetitive stuff in there which an AI agent could potentially also do. But I think before we get there, I think I'll be retired by then.
Right. So let me check if we have any further questions. I think we can have a last call for the questions if we have folks still interested to ask questions. But I hope everybody did enjoy this one of our first of the series of webinars that we are going to host starting this month. So keep us posted in terms of the topics that you would like us to cover during the webinar series, and always happy to hear the feedback from you all in terms of how you felt about the webinar that we hosted, any comments or how we can improve it, and even like if you have any specific topics in mind. So let's make it a two-way process so that we understand your needs and we help cater and address them. So I think anything further we have, Jasper?
No, just a big thanks to Jelle for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to help improve asset pricing professionals on our network. And just like I said, there was one final comment from Ninat.
Guys, you're talking through each other. You're both talking.
So we have one question.
Sorry, can you still hear me, guys?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, I understand that conjoint analysis used for predicts price increase from end user more. Can we use it technology industry for solution and service industry? Technology industry, the solutions you can definitely, but it depends, of course, what type of solution. If it's a B2C solution or a B2B solution, B2B solution, you would use it with the buyers as we did with everything else. B2C, you would, very often B2C solutions are web-based, and funny enough, most of our surveys are web-based, so that actually works really well. As an example, one thing where this works really well is in online insurance sales, because you go on online insurance takes a lot of time to figure out what's the different products they want to offer. You can actually use very easily survey data then to figure out, because it's exactly the same screen. You can show people which type of insurance would you choose and what's the message that's most important there. So yes, it would work for that. Service industry, of course, is where it gets a little bit harder. It depends really what part of the service industry we're talking about there. If we talk about, for example, about different cost for different types of concierge services and all that type of stuff, it's probably actually where this works not very well is where the personal touch and the personal connection are very important. If you have a driver you particularly like or a concierge particularly like, then that's harder to address in these things. Can you talk about what typical mistakes agencies also made implementing conjoint analysis from your experience? Well, to a degree, those are the things I went through. I mean, the one thing here is I think there's very often a level of modeling happening. Ultimately, what you do is you do the survey, you come out with a model. And that model you can give to the client, and very often clients love that. It's an Excel model or an online model where they put in different prices and they see different outcomes in terms of market shares and volumes and revenues and profit, if that's added to it. But actually, if you then look at the underlying confidence interval that goes with it, that can be that can actually make that quite irrelevant, that data. And the second thing is like I said, the biggest issue I see is that agencies and organizations, would love to do this. They then do it on a mobile environment. I'm not a big fan of mobile, because I think if you do a survey while sitting on a bus somewhere in London, whilst also listening to music and looking out the window and do a survey, that's not very replicable in terms of the environment you're trying to do. What would a human role be in pricing if advanced AI is used for pricing. Well, that's for most AI with these things, it has to be a human in the loop still. So you know, because actually these things can go off the rails as well. So there is a role, and it's also in guiding the AI in terms of, you know, what are the things you want it to do. I think this idea that you can just basically close your laptop and that somebody will just take over, I think is probably a bit much. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So thanks, Jelle, again for conducting this very interesting webinar, and thanks everyone for registering as well. I do know that I mean, we have folks attending from Europe as far as Africa and Asia, and we have folks registering from US as well. So it seems to be a pretty interesting topic for everyone, and everyone is curious about like what they can learn. And I hope everybody did get to learn something today. We do see a note of thanks from a lot of folks coming in here. So just trying to showcase here on the screen so that just to share with you, Yele. So yeah.
I can see them. I can read them myself. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool, awesome. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining our first webinar, and hope to see you again. And keep in touch with us and keep sharing your feedback and your interest of topics that we would like to cover in the future. So thanks, everyone. We would like to conclude over here. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.